So welcome everybody, and this is our second ZestCast where we're going to interview our expert contributors to the Zest Wellbeing Hub, which is our resource for organisations and individuals. So for those of you who don't know me, I know most of you, but some of you don't know me. I'm Rachel McGuinness. I'm the founder of Wake Up with Zest and the Zest Wellbeing Hub. And today we are interviewing Dave Algeo. Is it Algeo? Yes.
Yeah.
The stress guru who contributes to the men's health section of the Zest Wellbeing Hub. So during the ZestCast, please feel free to type questions or comments because I'll be sort of checking in with it. And there will be opportunities to ask questions at the end, but actually we'll just sort of see how it goes. So you can unmute yourself at the end. But if you could all mute yourself at the beginning, that would be absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to introduce you to Dave. So Dave, you're a former police officer and you're no stranger to supporting those in mental crisis. And this has influenced your current work, hasn't it, in speaking and coaching on the subject of developing resilience and enhancing well-being. Dave's got a particular focus on working with men, so it's great to see blokes here because you do blokes well-being. And so you're working with men to help them seek recover from burnout and achieve greater balance between success and well-being. So in this ZestCast, Dave's going to highlight the importance of our social connections, particularly for men, and especially during the times of restricted connection and the contact that we've experienced. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. And yeah, I guess just to flesh out a little bit in terms of the background in policing, it's not, as a police officer, I was never trained in specifically coping with, people in mental health crisis. It was just part of the experiences that you had. And I think it was those experiences that taught me, a lot in terms of how we as human beings cope. We cope with an amazing amount of things and stuff. But we all have a breaking point, and often, whilst policing, you deal with crime and that side of things. There is an element of dealing with those in crisis or more vulnerable, and I guess that's what's always struck me as a question is not so much whether we cope, but how do we cope? Because what has always struck me, both from my own personal experiences with mental health challenges and colleagues and members of the public, is that we often, in order to cope in ways that aren't great for us, that they don't necessarily do us a great amount of good in the medium to long term, but even the short term. So it's things like coping strategies like, and I'll hold my hand up to this, alcohol was a coping strategy. Silence, which is where the social connection side comes in, particularly for blokes, I think. I was brought up, and I don't know about yourselves, but I was brought up as a northern lad where you just shut the F up and get on with it, and you don't talk about this stuff. And that culture was very much ingrained in the policing environment, which when I joined was particularly a greater proportion of men as police officers. It shifted in the gender mix across the decades that I worked, which lent to a change in the environment and the culture. But it was still a macho and a culture in that sense. It was still historically more macho, which led to that kind of continuance of just shut up and get on with it. You meet at the pub afterwards and you drink away any kind of things that you've dealt with. You might even have that darker humor, and humor itself can be kind of a really useful strategy so long as it's not being used to cover over the cracks. And that's one of the challenges with it. So I'm very much, as a speaker and a trainer on the topic now, I talk about stress and resilience, and I use humor and props, cabbages and sprouts, as metaphors for some of those kind of getting the messages across, because I find humor is a good way to break down barriers, but we have to be careful with it because we can kind of rely on it too much to cover over the cracks. And I can, any thoughts from yourselves as listeners in, do you find that you potentially use that, humor as throwaway jokes to cover over the things that when we are struggling? I know I do, and I know I've had friends, the banter that we have is a great way to do that. And I put that in air quotes. Yeah, Mark, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess really in terms of where I've developed my interest is, yes, working with generally people. So I speak and train to mixed audiences across a lot of public sector in particular. So police, criminal justice, Crown Prosecution Service, prison service staff, NHS staff, which is particularly, important at the moment. But I focus a little on my coaching more around working with men. And that's the irony, I think. And this would be something I would kind of interested in any thoughts and feedback here, because I don't intend to talk the whole session. But when I deliver workshops with the clients that I do, say the Crown Prosecution Service or NHS, and people who voluntarily join those courses, typically the gender mix is a greater proportion of females in that group and less so men. And of the men, there are some who are more pretty open about why they come, but many come with the intention to be there because they want to support somebody else, their team or colleagues. And it's rarely themselves coming for their own help. Now, whether that's a good reason to bring them on the course and it's kind of an excuse, if you like, is a different question. But that's what's always fascinated me over the years when I was delivering these workshops. Why is that? And as a bloke myself, I kind of have a bit of an inkling in that we're not brought up to be open about this. It's a bit of a sign of weakness if we admit to this kind of thing. I need help. I need a bit of stress management or something. It's kind of we're admitting something weak. And I know from research, there are key elements of research that look at what is it that can bring about a sense of shame in men in particular, and appearing weak is a key trigger and a key factor. So if that leads to us a lot of maladaptive and a kind of coping practices and fronts and facades that we put on that are very thick and protective, we will not appear weak. We do not want to appear weak or in trouble or vulnerable. And I think that, as human beings, that can generally apply, but particularly for men, it can be particularly a driving force. So I guess that's why, as I've moved into coaching, I've found a great population of men are coaching, because they come to me in a more anonymous route, and we have that more one-to-one kind of conversation. I don't know if that makes sense or if it resonates with that. And I know, Rachel, you were kind of saying if you want to unmute, but I'm welcome any thoughts at the moment, because I'm going to talk about social connection shortly, but any thoughts from yourselves around that?
Yeah, please do just unmute and ask Dave questions.
Don't worry if there's no comments, it's fine. Or if you want to chuck something in the chat bar, that's fine. But I think that's what's really fascinated me about the subject, and really going on my own journey of learning how to cope more effectively and be a little bit more open. I'm still a work in progress as well. So really what today was about was just to pick up on the idea of connection, communication. How do we open up? And because as human beings, there can be a bit of a resistance or a reluctance to ask for help, particularly with men, because of that culture and that pressure. What I like to do is try and reframe it so that we don't see it as a sign of weakness or giving in or letting ourselves down or letting the side down. So I like to use metaphors for that. And I like to reframe what it means to ask for help. And this is where I bring in the concept of the social connection engines, which you may have seen my little videos within the Zest membership there, but I'll kind of refresh this and give you an opportunity to ask any questions. So I'm just going to show my screen here, because one of the things I found helpful to think about, and this is particularly relevant as well over the last, the last 10 months now of restrictions and lockdown. If we imagine, I don't know about you, if you can kind of take your head back to the beginning of lockdown, when it was kind of first starting, we knew there was something significant happening. We knew we had to knuckle down and do it, but there was almost this sense that if we just do this, we'll get through and we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And there were inklings that it was going to go on longer than we thought, but I think there was this real drive to think, right, let's do this, let's get it done. And for me, the metaphor here is where I started building the idea of it. It felt like almost like a short haul holiday to Europe. It was a couple of hours, 4-hour flight. We can do this, we'll get on there. We're packed, we're ready. We can do the flight. And on the other side, we'll have the sun and we'll have a cerveza or a beer or whatever at the other side. We'll kind of enjoy ourselves on the other side. Now, as the 10 months moved on, or as the months moved on and we had restrictions eased, then removed, then put back on, it felt like that short haul journey was changed on us. from a short haul journey to a long haul flight down to the Southern Hemisphere. And suddenly we're on this longer journey. We don't even know what the destination is or where it's going to end. And what I've found personally, and with, you know, people I've worked with and colleagues and friends, is that that uncertainty led to us feeling that like we struggle, you know, when is it going to end? I'm not packed for this. I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. And I'm not even sure that when I get to the other side of it, whether I'm going to like the destination. So these were the questions that were coming up a lot for lots of us. And because of that, that need to keep ourselves supported, to tap into support grew and grows. And we know from research that, you know, human beings need connection. We need to feel part of something, and we need to feel supported in order to feel less stressed, less anxious, and safer. So if I park the connection engines for a moment, if you imagine in terms of it, as human beings, that sense of isolation and that sense of connection is an evolved protective mechanism. So if you imagine, don't dwell on this image for goodness sake, but imagine me as caveman Dave, 100,000 years ago. I'm part of a community, a tribe, a group. Now, as part of a tribe and a group, that's really, really powerful, because that's where there is safety. There's safety in the group, safety in numbers, and we're all effectively looking out for threat and protecting each other. Now, as a community, we have a collective sense of alert, which is up here. We're all contributing to that with our eyes and ears and smell and what have you. That's where we feel that sense of collective safety, and it works. When we feel separated, so imagine if I left my group as Caveman Dave and I'm kind of wandering about, there is something instinctive in me that says, hang on a minute, you're vulnerable. You're away from your group, get back to the group. So I start to get that sense of stress and strain that's arising to tell me, get back there, you're on your own, you're at risk. And because I'm on my own, my alert level has to rise a lot higher. It goes to a state of red, because I am now having to do all of the work to look for threats on my own. Does that kind of make sense? So whereas a group, we can kind of collectively share that burden. On my own, I'm having to be on state red alert. And that's where we get this visceral feeling of loneliness and disconnection. It's an evolved mechanism. There's an emotional element and a physiological element to it, but it's all about protection. It's all about get back to the group. So here I am feeling stressed, you know, stress responses on high alert. And if that is maintained for a longer period of time, that's when we get into the state of chronic stress, and it becomes potentially problematic over time. So when we think about the last few months in particular, if we're in a state where we are feeling disconnected because of restrictions, we're not necessarily spending time with, you know, the work colleagues we do in the same way, with the people we might see in the gym, or, you know, the communities that we're involved with, we don't have that same connection. We're feeling that disconnect, and it's affecting us in that visceral way. And that is raising potentially our stress levels on a chronic day-to-day basis. And that's when we become vulnerable to the risks of that kind of disconnection, that loneliness and that isolation becoming an issue for us health-wise, physically and psychologically. So that's when potentially anxiousness, a feeling of down and lower mood, can come in and be more present. And it may be that we just don't know what it is, but it could well be because of this disconnection. Because one of the key things about research into social connection and loneliness and what have you, before COVID came along, but I'm sure it's going to be borne out by the research that will come out after, you know, as a result of this, before COVID came along, is that face-to-face, in-person human interaction for all of us as human beings generally, that face-to-face, in-person connection is vital. And doing Zooms and these kinds of things are great, but they're not a like-for-like replacement. They're kind of a lower quality. We need human in-person, face-to-face interaction. And when it comes to blokes, that is particularly relevant, because how many of us are kind of brought up to feel like we need to do it ourselves, go it alone. No man isn't, you know, we're all this island, we can sort it out ourselves. And rarely do we kind of work or kind of focus on getting the team together and supporting us in our particular goals. Yes, we might be part of a team at work or a sports team and that kind of thing. But when it comes down to when we struggle, are we conditioned? And I'll ask you that question. You can kind of reflect on yourself. Are you conditioned to think, what's wrong with me? I'm weak, I'm pathetic. I should be able to do this. I need to just sort it out and do it on my own and not reach out. So not only do we need that connection, go on, Chris, if you want to contribute there, not only do we need that connection, perhaps as men we're cultured to resist that natural evolved mechanism and can't fight it almost. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah, Dave, it's fascinating stuff. And just one of the things that you're really making me think about then is, it clearly affects some people more than others. Some people, we've seen that in our team, even, within our business, but also just more widely, some people almost are thriving on it in a way, for some bizarre reasons, I guess, maybe more introverted, maybe just enjoy the time at home and all that sort of stuff. Yet others really struggling. You look at the two people side to side and you're thinking not a lot of difference on the outside. What contributes to that difference? Is it the makeup of their personality, or is it just maybe by accident people have figured out the coping strategies? Or I don't know, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on that.
It's a really good question, and I think you hit on a couple of good points. I think the answer is probably all of the above, because there's a number of things. Firstly, yes, preferences around our personalities. It might surprise you because I do this stuff, but I'm deeply introvert. So actually, in some way, the actual not being out there all of the time, being that extrovert person, doing what I did, kind of plays to my introvert nature. However, even as an introvert, we still need that strong connections. So what I actually found, and this was a learning lesson for me, and particularly came clarified when I was doing a lot of research around this, but as it played to my introversion, I almost overdid it and retreated too much, and started to realize that I was kind of getting a bit of a shell around me. So actually pushing myself out as an introvert, not to be gregarious, which may be completely against my nature, but just to reconnect, tap in more, make an effort to do more, helped me feel better, because I'd found and not realized that my mood was dropping a little bit without realizing it. So you're right, there are preferences, and some people might find this is more comfortable for them, but we all need to just be a little bit careful and check in that we're not totally isolating. The other side is, you're right, some people will, because perhaps practice, their tendency to be more introvert or whatever, they might just have a ready set of coping strategies for it. They might be ready and able to slip into it. So you're right. And somebody who's perhaps more extrovert and needs a bit more of that variety of conversations and a bit more vibrant potentially could struggle definitely with that.
Yeah, nice, thanks.
Yeah, so thanks for that. It was a great question actually. It's something I've been thinking a lot about over the last few months myself as well. So any other questions? Because I'm going to develop the connection engine metaphors now, but just if there's any
more an observation, Dave, really.
Go on, Mark. Yeah.
First lockdown, it was great. I really enjoyed it, actually. There's obviously the novelty of being at home all the time, but it was obviously lovely weather, and we all thought it would only be for a few weeks, and me and my team seem to cope quite well. But obviously, as it's gone on and we're now in lockdown 3, I've felt my own mood sort of going downhill a little bit, just partly because of restriction, but I guess I'm reasonably extrovert, and most of my time was going out and meeting people.
Yeah.
And with that not being possible, that's been difficult, So it's like you say, you sort of notice your own mood changing a bit, and the sort of weight of the world a little bit coming down on you. And we all have coping strategies, and I exercise and I eat well and do as much as we can, go out for a walk and so forth. But I'm sure a lot of people have found this lockdown harder than the rest. I don't know whether that's something that you've come across in talking to people as well. I think.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Cheers for sharing that, Mark. I know there's a few nods there. I don't know, Dave, did you unmute? Have you unmuted just to chuck your thoughts?
Yeah, no, just to hop on the back of that, really. I think it's, I've definitely noticed a difference this time around. I think maybe you got the end of the year and Christmas, it's a bit of a kind of boost, and you're looking back and you're like, okay, cool, what's going to happen in the new year? Kind of usual New Year slump, I guess. But with that is, like you say, you don't know when it's going to end and what the destination is. And I definitely get a sense of that with not just blokes, but just in general, family and people that we know. There seems to be a sense now of shall we say. I definitely experience it, and it just resonated with your analogy and what you described earlier, for sure.
Yeah. Cheers. Thanks, Dave. That's great to kind of add into to flesh out the comments there. There's a couple of things that I guess from those points. One is it's times like now as much as any time, but remind yourself you've got permission to be human, you know, that actually these are challenging times, unprecedented for so many of us, and actually maintaining our mood is possibly the kind of it's going to be nigh on impossible. We will have ups and downs, and perhaps we'll sink a little bit. And I don't mean sink, but we'll just dip. But giving ourselves permission to feel those ups and downs, the key thing, as Mark was saying there, is to spot it and to notice it. I think because, and I'm having different conversations around in different contexts, but I think one of the risks is that we don't spot it. We don't spot that we might be slipping down, and that's when it can become a lot riskier, So I think firstly, it's just checking in with ourselves, permission to be human, feeling a bit low. How do I feel today? Do you know what? It's grey weather. I feel a bit low. Okay, spotted it. Let's not judge it. It's the times they are, but what can we do, as Mark was saying, just to kind of bring ourselves back rather than allowing it to slip down. And if we are in a place where we're a little bit further down, as I'll come on to the engines, we may need a bit, some support on that, So I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing is, and the difference, I guess, between the lockdown and the first one and now, one of the clear ones is, it felt like there was an end date, didn't it? Whereas now it's kind of, and I think they did prime us, and it wisely so, because there is a lot of uncertainty, that it's not going to be a fixed date. It's going to be, we're not sure. The challenge there is, how do we prepare our head for that? Because our head wants an end date and a certainty in that. And I think that's the challenge. And one of the things I do when I'm working with some coaching clients is kind of two things really, is let's get real about that. Let's think about that in terms of get it out of your head, get it onto paper, get it onto a conversation, and just talk about those things. And then let's talk about what I call if this, then that. So rather than thinking, oh, if it goes on for this, or when's it going to happen, let's kind of turn that into, okay, so if it goes on for another month, if it goes on for another 3 months, if it goes on, then if that happens, then that. So if this happens, then I will do. And what I find is when people come up with 1, 2, or 3 actions for something that they're worried about, all those what ifs, those concrete actions give a sense of control back. And that's what we yearn for in situations like this, isn't it? It's just some sort of control over things, and kind of letting go of the things we can't control is one thing, but then thinking, if that does happen, okay. For me, just sharing personally, last year, June, my fiance and I were meant to be getting married in Italy in June last year. Didn't happen. Obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty. We put it off to August this year. We have that what if. What if it doesn't happen? Now, hopefully it will, but as I learned as a police officer, by all means hope for the best, but let's plan for the worst. What will we do? So the if this, then that is, if it doesn't happen in August, what will we do? And we've got 3 kind of things that we've got in plan. It's not certain, it's not said, but it's just helped take that kind of angst out of it a little bit more. Does that make sense? So if you have a what if going round, have a think about, okay, so what is that what if? And think, if this, then that. What 1, 2, or 3 things will I do if that happens? Rarely do things get as bad as the worst thing we tend to think of, but it's worth just planning that because it gives us a sense of control. So just a thought, but yeah. So thanks for those comments. Anyway, I'll kind of, unless there's any other comments or questions, I'll just build up on the metaphor here, just to kind of take us back to the long haul flight, if you like. Now, if we picture this, we're on this long haul flight. We need to keep our aircraft in the air. This is us, isn't it? Our aircraft is this, this physical, emotional, psychological being. How do we keep ourselves afloat? And, Mark, you were saying the things about like eating right, exercise, those kinds of things, getting outside. They're really important. What I want to focus on is your connection engines. And imagine just any typical jumbo jet. You've got 4 engines on that jumbo jet. You might have more, I don't know. But let's imagine you've got 4. Any typical jumbo jet, I would guess, judging by the films I've been on, where engine number 1's gone down, activate engine, there's always built-in redundancy. So if imagine we've got 4 engines, and these are 4 key engines. And if one fails, we hopefully have 2 or 3 that can come to their aid to keep us in the air. It might be a bit of a bumpier journey, but it keeps us floating in the air, and even safely get us down onto the ground if we need to make that emergency landing. So, oops. Engines 1 is the big one of the big ones, and it's your close and intimate relationships. Now, as human beings, and this is relevant to blokes again, but as human beings, we've evolved to need that close, intimate relationships with fewer people. So maybe with one person or two or three, really close relationships where we are who we are. The guard comes down, the facades come down. We're emotionally open with that person. We can connect that way, and they are with us. So it's a two-way street. Now, that could be a partner. It could be a parent. It could be a sibling or a best friend, you know, like a soulmate type of thing. But that is really an important engine. The research from the 70s to the 90s, the research in loneliness indicates that the number of us as generally as people, not just men in particular, the number of our intimate relationships on average has gone from 3 down to 1 because of the nature of society and the world, etc. Now, if we think about that in terms of us these days, and potentially for blokes, that network, that might actually be reduced to 1, possibly even 0. But again, there are things that can take that engine out, you know, a relationship breakdown, a bereavement, those, you know, significant things like that. So in reality, that is a really important engine, but life can happen. The second engine is equally, not quite as equally in the sense of the depth of emotional richness and intimacy, but a really powerful engine. It's that circle of close family and friends. Now, these are the people that you may not be totally open and honest with, but you share things with, you share memories and moments and times. You can go to a friend and say, oh God, do you fancy a beer, and let's just have half an hour just chewing the cud. You know, just that kind of conversation. You can be open, you may not share everything, but they're a close circle. Family, you know they've got your back if you need them. That circle of friends has been probably hampered a bit, I would suggest, over the last 10 months, because we may not be able to connect with these people as readily in person. And the third one is what's been hammered the most, I would suggest, is that wider network. The people that you generally bump into from time to time, or, you know, or see every day on your way to work, at the garage when you pick up your coffee and you refuel, at work, the colleagues, the people you don't like, but you see every day, they remind you exist, you know, that kind of thing. This wider network is really important for a couple of reasons. One, it reminds you exist, and it's kind of a connection with just human beings in general. The other is that's where you often can tap into new resources, new ideas, new people. And actually, that's where people from engine 3 could graduate to engine 2 or even engine 1. So it's kind of that's that flexibility. Now, engine 4, and that's the one I think's been really hammered. I don't know about yourself, but you know, with the restrictions, we probably didn't appreciate how valuable it was until we're locked down and working from home. The engine number 4 is the one that I often really stress, particularly for blokes, it is your professional and independent support. Because I think this is where, you know, this kind of we can do it ourselves culture can shut us off from accessing, you know, asking our GP, seeking counselling, and accessing maybe employee assistance program and the 24-hour confidential helplines that are available for counselling, you know, a coach or anybody like that, somebody professional and independent who has a particular expertise. Now, this is the engine that's not switched on, but it's there ready to be switched on when you need to make that emergency landing. But how many of us, particularly as blokes, are willing or even know that it's there? And I guess that's the key question I want to ask you, because we probably all, I mean, I know I can go to my GP and say, look, I'm feeling really low, but I know the journey I'd have to get to go there, to get to that place to do it. And I think this is the challenge with blokes. So engine number 4 is there, but will we use it if we need to? Because it's about not crash landing. It's about saying, bring us down safely. So does that make sense as the metaphor? Because that's what I want you to think about really in terms of your network, is generally review how you are with that network, particularly over the last 10 months. Any attention, any questions that you need to sort of think about on those. So I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, well, I'll leave it up for a minute. If there's any questions or observations on that, by all means, throw in some. Go on, Chris.
Dave, just to say, I think, you know, just on the one about the work network, I think definitely I had no idea how important that was, you know, for our whole team, actually. I think we all realized how much, you know, how big a thing that was for everyone. You know, real eye-opener, definitely.
Yeah.
In one sense, I'm glad all this has happened because I've learned that.
Yeah, we just wish it wouldn't be lasting so long.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there was an
we learned
easier
that
way
lesson
we would
months
have
ago.
taken it, but yeah. At least it's something we can build off of now, because we've said this a number of times. The sort of conversations we have in our team meetings. We talk about all of this stuff now. We've never talked about well-being, mental health. In fact, it was really interesting signing up with Rachel's program. It was something we'd had on our list for months, but we thought, the team will never go for this. They'll all roll their eyes. Yeah, we launched it, within weeks of lockdown starting, we were like straight on it. Everyone said, yeah, we're not, we don't know, but let's give it a go. And then people were messaging me afterwards saying, really brilliant. Thanks for getting Rachel on. That was, that was just what we need. And all of a sudden we're talking about how well each other's sleeping, and, are we getting outside for some daylight? We would have, a bunch of techie blokes never spoke about that stuff. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And you're right. I suppose out of every kind of, cloud, there is a bit of a silver lining. And I think I've been listening to a number of psychologists and people who are working in this, and they talk about a bow wave of mental health that is coming at us. And that the press are making a big deal of it, and rightly so, because it is something we need to consider. What we do need to factor in, though, is that the majority of people who are struggling won't need necessarily that professional support. Most of us will fix, we'll kind of recover ourselves. But one factor that's really important in that is just knowing that there's something there if I need it, or someone there if I need it. That's where this comes in so brilliantly. Do you know what I mean? It's not twisting your arm to look at it. It's just saying it's there if you need it. And then we can, and then we can filter down and support those who maybe need a little bit more, and then a lot more, Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Cheers for that. Any other thoughts, any comments or observations on it, or questions?
Yeah, it's all really good stuff, actually, Dave. And something you touched on earlier, which, I always like to think I'm pretty positive, but you can get this sort of low level ambient noise almost of apprehension. You feel a little bit on edge. You're not quite sure why, which kind of ties into your observation earlier on about, are conditioned in a certain way. And suddenly if you're on your own, you feel a bit exposed. And I've never quite been able to figure out why it is sometimes, because I've got no reason for it. But sometimes you can just feel that level of anxiety. But it's almost worse than that, because it's in the background, but it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because I don't know about you, but like when you feel like you kind of want to know, what is it? How do I fix it? How do I sort it out? It's there, and it's kind of it's a bit like turbulence, isn't it? And you're flying along, and there's just that things are a bit bumpy at the minute, and actually just acknowledging it is what it is. There's a good reason in the sense of us as this human being, that evolved person. We're struggling because this is not natural. This is not how we naturally communicate day to day. I mean, I'm so thankful we have this compared to if 5-10 years ago this happened. Oh, do you know what I mean? But yeah, so it adds to that level of background noise in our life.
It's almost like that sort of fight or flight thing, but you don't know what from.
Yeah.
There's nothing exactly. Obvious to sort of focus on.
Yeah. And we need to, where is it? Where's the threat? That's kind of the feeling. We need to find it. And because it's not a saber-tooth tiger over there or this or that, then the primitive part of our brain meshing with the emotions and all that, it isn't quite adapted to what we're dealing with at the moment.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Go on, Mark.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what John said there. There's this sort of background stuff going on, and we all have stuff in our lives, don't we? That we deal with, and some of them we can deal with and do something about, and some of them we've just got to accept. I think that was before COVID, obviously, but that COVID on top has added another layer of, I'm not an anxious person at all, but I can sense what John was trying to explain. There's that sort of underlying sort of unease, and I think it's about the uncertainty. As you say, lockdown 1, we thought, oh, this is for a few weeks, we'll be all right, we'll cope, and then we'll be back in the office and going out for lunch and meeting people for coffee and drinks after work, and life goes back to normal. But it hasn't, and the longer it's gone on, the more that stuff has started to rise up. So it's it's about taking time out, I think, and having a sanity check once a week if you can do it. Talk to somebody once a week, and you'll find that, in my experience, you'll find that it's not that bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I completely get what you said, John.
Yeah. Sorry, the last thing maybe is because we live in this connected world, we can't get away from it. You turn on the TV, you look on the internet, you look at, you talk to your mates, and it's just like, it's bad, it's relentless bad news. You just feel like you just want to turn the whole lot off and read a book, which is what I do.
That's some brilliant comments there, because I guess social connection is a big part of the mix, and it's kind of recognizing that how do we just reconnect, make up for the fact that we're not on a like for like replacement here with the face-to-face, asking for help when we need to. But you're absolutely right with a lot of those other tips and thoughts is, what else do we do? So that self-care thing around it is really important. And I think you're right that let's be right, you tap into the news. There was a point where I couldn't take my eyes off the news. It was on all the time, the briefings, and it was just car crash telly. And I realized, what am I doing? But so it's kind of inoculating yourself. And one of the best things I did, because I was reviewing my kind of influences was it from tech that junk in, junk out type of thing, that kind of phrase I might have. But the point is, there was a lot of junk going in, and I've removed everything off my phone, even social media, email, because I was just compulsively doing that and trying to just eliminate news unless it was particularly something I had to, like a timely announcement or something.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it can it distorts it, because one of the things I often say is that if you finish the day living and breathing, there's more gone right than wrong. Albeit there's days that challenge that for us, but we are wired and evolved to focus on the negative, because that's what's kept us alive and surviving. It's kind of likening, do you finish your day like an episode of EastEnders, on the drama, the cliffhanger, the whatever, or do you finish it like a day, an episode of Country File? Because Country File deals with topical issues, but it finishes on nice things, doesn't it? So it's kind of, how do we put back in some positives, particularly at the end of our day? That gratitude practice, the awareness, and just some fresh air, something positive, because your brain hooks into the negative stuff, and we need to try and unhook it. Talk to somebody, get it out of your head, do some of that kind of self-talk, and then hook into positive, because it loves to sweat stuff. I talk about it sweating the right sprouts, sprout-sized things, sprout-sized actions. Hook it out of negative and hook it into the positive things. And it need only be a 2 or 3 small things, as you've suggested. That's what self-care is. We often kind of associate that with selfishness or a bit self-indulgent, but actually it's just, it's like a water stop on a marathon. You're not going to pass by if you're thirsty, because you're not going to last much longer after. You need to sustain yourself with self-care.
I think as well as don't watch the news.
Yeah.
I turned off all notifications on my iPhone.
Oh, yeah.
Because you stuff binging and things flashing up and so forth. And the only thing that interrupts me is a proper telephone call. But otherwise I can look at all the other stuff later on.
Yeah.
But this constant interruption, and it's about life in general. Again, it's not COVID related in particular, but anything you can do to sort of not get involved in that stuff, I think is useful.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the one more thing I was going to say is the Captain Tom, who sadly passed, obviously, but his mantra was "Tomorrow will be a better day," and I think that's such a good thing to kind of keep in mind and try and live by if you can. Tomorrow will be a better day.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, it's keeping that optimistic view of it. We've got to deal with the reality, but be optimistic about it. Not delusional, but optimistic. I think that's so important, isn't it? And you're absolutely right. And there's a man who is such an inspiration. Is such an inspiration. Never mind was, he is, So you're right. Brilliant. Yeah. So I mean, any other questions? Because I could talk all day about this stuff, just kind of.
Dave, I'm just thinking just about stuff Mark was just saying there, and the news and all that, and does that tie back into what you were saying earlier on about the control thing around, when the news is bombarding you with it's another thing. Well, what am I going to do? Oh no, so you never get to the point of planning your actions, because the inputs of situational awareness are just non-stop, and so therefore the sense of out of control increases.
Yeah. And
you never get to thinking, okay, what am I going to do with those? I think that's brilliant what you just said about those. What's those 2 or 3 positive things you can take a grip on, every day, just, that sort of yeah, I don't know. It just seems to all tie together around that sort of theme of regaining control of yourself and your life and your future and that sort of stuff. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the models I use when I'm talking about well-being, resilience, and whatever it is, the combination for negative strain is high demand. So high demands, both work, home, big, little, the stuff out there and the stuff that we add in here, and low control. The third element is low social support, which was talked a fair bit about. Low control is where we really start to struggle. Now, some of us need a bit more control over our lives than others, but it's an individual. But control is another way of saying, can I handle this? Can I deal with this? How do I? What can I do to take control? And it's give ourselves a perception of control as much as reality, because obviously there's a lot we can't control. And you're absolutely right. So there's two things there. That gratitude practice is well replicated in research and the research literature. And what the practice is just look for 3 things each day that you're thankful for, appreciative of, that have gone right. That practice, no more than 3, because actually it can have a counter effect if you try to find 12. 3 things. Tune into those. The other thing is reduce the inputs. One of the things I found, again, I was always had something going into my head. When I was going for a run, there'd be a podcast on. I'd go for this, there'd be music or an audio book, And I realized there's lots going in, not a lot coming out. I'm not doing a lot in my head. And actually that's where control comes, because if you can reduce the inputs, the noise, then you allow your brain to do what it's evolved to do, because it's fantastic at it, is just mentally file, sort through, problem solve, work out how to, because we're naturally evolved to be problem solvers. But when we bombard ourselves that kind of telling us it's all going to hell in a handcart, we don't give our brain that chance to go, hang on a minute, it's more going right than wrong. Turn that down. What can I do? How can I solve this and do better at that? Appreciate that.
That's fascinating, Dave, because I guess especially when a lot of the inputs are effectively fresh problems, and your brain's like saying, I want to solve it, I want to solve that problem, I want to solve that problem, and then it's just hitting overload, like I can't solve all these problems. Now I feel like I'm failing. So whereas it's a really interesting idea. Just actually, when the sink's getting full and it's overflowing, what's the first thing you do? Well, turn the tap off.
Yeah. And pull the plug out, which is also get it onto paper, talk to somebody, I guess, as well. Sorry. One thing, you reminded me of something, and I have never been able to find this research, but I remember a good few years ago, remember the 9/11 Twin Towers? One of the things that came out of research after that was probably the first time I remember being 24-hour continuous news, replay. And one of the things that came out of that was the difference between read media and TV media, that if you watch and watch and watch, your brain is reliving and treating every time it watches it as a new input. And that was leading to reliving trauma and a feeling of it being worse. I mean, it's dreadful enough, but you know what I mean? Whereas when we used to read a newspaper, we'd read it once and that was it, type of thing. So that's the other side of the constant always on attention and news economy, isn't it? It's every half hour. It's the same messages repeated in a different way. So cut that input down to whatever, then give us the chance to let the brain do what it's just brilliant at. Go on, Dave.
Yeah, no, just to add, I think this fits in with what you guys have been saying, is I've found it really helpful just to have an hour a week where I just think about my own well-being, and I literally just turn everything off, and I've just got my notebook, and I write stuff down, and I plan 1 or 2 or 3 things that I'm going to do, and I plan it in. And the weeks I don't do that are the worst weeks. I haven't done it this week, and I feel rubbish. And it's like, I can see the effect it has. I didn't take that time, for whatever reason. It's a whole host of reasons, but it's like the weeks I do that, it's like, good. I know I've accomplished something. I've done one thing. It's just having that 1 hour a week for me is just really helpful, and that seems to tie in with what you've been saying. So yeah,
brilliant. I love that. I mean, that's it, isn't it? In a nutshell, just invest in some time. It's a bit like paying into your psychological pension. We all potentially pay in a financial pension, even a physical pension with exercise. What about your psychological pension? That's what that is. It's a payment. It's not, and it doesn't just yield a future reward. It yields a reward right now as well. So nice one. I like that. Great idea. Brilliant.
Has anybody got any more questions? Lots of great information, Dave. Thank you.
Cheers, thanks. I've enjoyed the conversation with everybody as well. Thanks for your comments and interaction. And I like your comment there, Mark. Don't watch the news.
Yeah. I mean, actually, one thing that I found, because, you know, this lockdown has been quite tough, was to write down a list of all my stressors and then kind of grade them. What can I control? What can I influence? And what's beyond my control? And what was beyond my control, I just had to just let go. So that's been a very useful exercise to do, and then just check in every week just to see how you're doing on those things. So it's kind of similar to what Dave was doing, you know, with his sort of hour invested in, you know, writing things down in his book. But I found that really helpful for me too. And then every night before I go to sleep, writing 3 things that I was grateful for during the day, and that sort of ends the day on a positive note.
Yeah. It actually helps in settling down and unwinding and all sorts.
It does, yeah.
It's ending the day like an episode of Country File. That's how it
Not a
nice and fluffy.
Yeah. As long as you're not flogging the calendar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course,
But I loved your comments about, you know, giving yourself permission to be human and checking in with yourself. So I think that's really, really important. And then where we sort of tend to be sort of catastrophizing a little bit and doing the what ifs, but doing the if this, then that, and writing down those actions. I think that's a real nugget. I'm going to steal that one. And then, you know, just making sure that you utilize your engines, your social engines. So now you know what they all are. Where can you tap into them? And I suppose the Zest Wellbeing Hub is the kind of engine for. So, Dave, have you got any tips that you'd like to leave us with, or have we covered them all?
I think kind of, I guess, summarizing those, because there's a lot, but it's always about, you can almost be overwhelmed by how to manage your stress, can't you? Because it's so much. So let's boil it down. I guess the theme is connection. So have a think about how are your connections, and whether you're introvert, extrovert, whatever, what could you do just to tweak up or take advantage of, you know, or refresh a connection, you know? And then that input output probably did resonate a little bit, is kind of just see where you can just cut the inputs down to give your brain that chance to do what it's naturally evolved to do, you know, get a grip of the problem and tease it out. And a bit of self-care. Dave's idea is a great one, you know, just kind of spend a little bit of time. What would do me good? 3 things. Brilliant. Yeah. Couldn't have put it better myself.
So, I mean, February is all about self-care. So, you know, it's great to hear that tip from Dave. So if people want to get in touch with you, Dave, how do they do that?
Well, I'll put my email in there. If anybody wants to get in touch, and website's there. So yeah, I'm available for a chat or anything, you know, this conversation. If anybody does want to have a chat, I've got a bunch of resources. I'm kind of obviously sharing some of those with the Zest portal, if you like, anyway. So anything that you think might be useful as well for future content on the portal, I'm happy to sort of look at as well, you know.
Now that'd be great, because I'm always up for ideas that, you know, what people want to consume. So do let me know. Our next ZestCast is next Thursday again. We are going to try and run about 2 or 3 a month. And it's all about how to create and understand better relationships with John Kenny, the relationship guy. So that's at 4:30. So I'm just going to put the link in here, but you will receive an email. If you're picking up my weekly emails, you receive that. I just want to say thank you so much, Dave. This has been a great ZestCast, great number 2 ZestCast. Thank you everyone for attending, and for those who listen to the recording, I hope you get a lot out of it. So hopefully we will see you next time. Otherwise, just enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. It's been lovely to meet you all. Thank you.
Cheers all. Take care.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you both.
Thank you.